Well, good day, everyone. My name is Kevin Dupree. I'm with FMT Consultants. I'm one of the senior directors here. Excited to be with you today to go through the Microsoft Dynamics year-end closing procedures. We hope that this will be a very informative and educational experience for you. So how do we prepare for year-end close? What are the steps involved in just kind of getting things going? Then we're going to go through each of these individual areas: inventory, receivables, payables, fixed assets, the general ledger, and payroll. And as I said before, as you have questions, go ahead and type those into the question section of the GoToWebinar control panel, and then we'll answer those at the very end, questions and answers. So how do we prepare for year-end? Well, year-end close, predominantly what it's doing is actually moving data from the open areas of Dynamics GP, the open tables, if you will, to the historical tables. And so because it's the year-end closing procedures are updating records, moving data from one area to another, you want to make sure that you have a point of recovery. So you need to make sure that you have Dynamics GP backed up, and you should back up the databases, the dictionaries, and any integrations. Now, the dictionaries and integrations, if you don't know what to do there, you can certainly grab an IT professional inside your organization, or we can walk you through how to do that. And the slide here is a little bit of a misnomer in the second bullet point. You want to make sure that you download the US 2015 year-end update, but the installation process, I'm going to actually point out when, at what point in time during the year-end that you should be actually applying that year-end update, because as it relates to payroll, there are certain things that you want to do prior to installing that update, and I'll take you through that today. So, and maybe real quick, when we get over, you're not gonna sit through PowerPoint the entire hour. We're gonna pop over to Dynamics GP and walk through these things here. We really want, so when I get into Dynamics GP, I'll show you some of the backup procedures and so on. But let's kind of get into our first section. So inventory control, and we'll talk as I'll talk about this as we're going through this, because if you're a fiscal year company, so if your year end of your company is not 31 December, but it ends at a different point in time during the year, there's actually fiscal year end processing, and then there's calendar year end processing. And so sometimes you have to do both the calendar year end at the calendar year end. So if I'm a fiscal company, when we get into payables and we're talking about 1099s, etc., you're going to want to make sure that you're doing the calendar year close now, and then do the fiscal year end procedures at the appropriate time based upon your fiscal year end. But on the inventory control side of things, the big things here are you only have to do the fiscal year end. So there's no calendar close. The process itself is transferring those current year quantities to the last year and updating our beginning balances for this new year. And also, if you're looking at some of the inquiry windows within the inventory module, there's quantities that were sold and so on, and it's zeroing those counters out, so those inquiry windows are current to the new fiscal year. And then you can see here so that some of the options during the close process itself are to be able to remove certain things. And so you want to make sure that you're very careful when you're selecting those options that you truly do want to do some removal, because in this case here, rather than archiving, meaning copying from the open area to the historical table, this removal is removing this or deleting this from your system. And so things like discontinued items, well, if you're no longer gonna, you're not gonna reactivate them and start selling or buying them and so on, maybe you do want to remove those from the item master, and so the sold purchase receipts, etc. But we have a number of clients that are in the life sciences sector and others that are doing lot controlled items, and that they need to be able to track not only the quantities and the lots that they have in inventory, but when they sell something, what was the end customer that received that lot. So if there's a product recall or something else, that they're able to go back and backtrack to see who sold that material, where it came from, etc. And so lot attributes or the lot category values, you may not want to have those things removed because you want to keep those there for reporting purposes, etc. And so let's kind of toggle over here to the Dynamics GP application. We're going to be looking at Dynamics GP 2015 R2 today. This is the most current version of Dynamics GP. And so while we're focused on the inventory side in this particular section here, let's kind of quickly recap about the backup procedures, etc. So underneath this Dynamics GP flag, you're going to see an option called maintenance, and then from here you can go into the backup process. Now this requires the system password, so hopefully you have that. If not, go ahead and get that from the IT folks, or if the IT department doesn't want to provide you with that system password because they're controlling that, because that's also how we get into setting up new users and modifying user security, etc. They can perform these database backups and not actually have to go through the Dynamics GP interface. They can do so at the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio. They can run the backups. But the backups that are going to need to be performed are the system database, which is synonymous with the Dynamics database. It's called that. And then you'll see, in my case here, I only have one company, so I'm going to see the one company in there. There's a quick question that just popped up. If IT already has a daily backup, do we need to perform this backup? Well, it depends on when you're doing the year-end close process. So if they performed a nightly backup last night, but transactions have been processing throughout the day today, and you're about to kick off the year-end closing processes right now, you're going to want to run another backup at that point in time, because if for some reason you have to restore from that backup, and there's very few things that would require that, you could potentially lose transactions because of the difference between when that backup was first taken and when you're actually kicking off the year-end closing process. Great question. It can't hurt to just be on the safe side and run a backup right before you're doing this thing, because after you finish with everything, you can always get rid of that backup, and storage is relatively cheap today. So maybe you even want to hold that off, or kind of archive that off to some sort of flash drive or other removable media that you can hold on to for a period of time. So great question there. So the backup process here is pretty straightforward. It's selecting the company. We're going to choose OK to kick the backup off. The only thing is if you do not have the Dynamics GP client, what we're looking at here, this is the traditional client. I'm not doing things through the web client today, but the traditional client needs to be installed on the SQL server where Dynamics GP is installed. And we can help you with that, or your IT professional can ensure that that's there. Without the application installed on the SQL server level, that you're not going to be able to run the backup through Dynamics GP. So the other piece, just kind of getting ready for everything, is making sure that all of our transactions within Dynamics GP are actually posted for the year that we're closing. And so what I'm doing is I'm opening up the master posting window, and this shows all of the batches of transactions across all of the series. And so you can see here their sales series, the assembly is an inventory function, general entry, etc. So you just want to confirm that all the transactions for the year that you're closing have been processed and posted within Dynamics. So this would be done if we had anything that we needed to post, we'd have to go back and run the backup again because we've changed some things since the last time. And then because we're moving things into the new year, we also want to make sure that the new fiscal year is set up. And so I'm really kind of, the fiscal period setup is on page 8 of the year-end closing procedures manual, but you can actually get to this window through the Dynamics GP flag, tools, setup, company, and then fiscal periods. Or if you're not wanting to use the menuing system, if you go to the administrative area page, you'll be able to see that there. And the process for setting up a new year is fairly straightforward. So I have, through 2019. So let's set up, 2020. So I'm going to just type in 2020 in the year. you're going to see here that the first and last day of the year are defaulted in based upon the previous year. So it knows that this is a calendar year here. I'm going to click the calculate button, and what that's going to do is it's going to build those 12 periods out for me because I told it I'm a 12-period company, and we'll see that now Dynamics GP is added in those new financial periods. You may want to, if you're using some of the wildcards or other attributes within Management Reporter, change these period names up because they're just going to default into period 1, 2, 3, etc. to be, January, February, in my case, my calendar year. But if you're doing a fiscal year, these might be period names, the specific month names that you want to put on in. And so that way you'll be able to use, some of the features of Management Reporter to pull those things on into some of the financial reports that you're doing. So I'm going to close that on down, and it's going to create my years at this point in time. So my years are ready to go. And now we're ready to start our inventory year-end close. And so this is starting on page 50 of the guide. So we're going to go through, and before we go through the year-end closing procedure on the inventory side of things, there's some reconciliation procedures that should be run to true up those quantities. So if you remember the slide that I was showing you, and not to make everybody ill, but let's kind of pop back to that slide real quick. It's updating, it's transferring these quantities from the current year to last year. And so what that means is we want to make sure that those values are correct. Sometimes that they can be out of sync. And so we're going to want to go through and true those values on up, and we do that through the reconciliation process. And if you're following along with the guide, the year-end closing training manual, you'll see that there's a very specific order that these things need to be done in, and they need to be done in this order in order to ensure that the quantities are updated correctly. So we want to reconcile our sales documents. What this is doing is it's going through and looking at the sales activity, our open orders, etc., and going to the inventory quantity values and truing up the quantity that you have on order, the quantity that you've sold, etc. So it's making sure that those values are all correct. Now, if this is something you haven't done in the past, this process here, depending on the volume of sales activities that you have through the sales order processing module, could take a certain amount of time. So we'll typically recommend either doing this, in the evening hours, or doing this in a test environment to, see how long it's going to run, and then going through the process in the production environment here. So we're going to reconcile our sales processes or our sales quantities. Next, we're going to go into the purchasing documents, and these are underneath the routines of their respective series. So this is the purchasing series routines. We're going to go through that exact same process there. You can see it's a very similar screen. And then lastly, we're going to go through and do the reconciliation of our inventory quantities. And so this is going to go through and make sure that our quantity on hand, our quantity available, etc., all of those things are properly set. Now, most of the time, companies that are using the inventory module and part of the year-end closing process will go through the process of actually taking a physical inventory. And so that's done through the stock count schedule and the stock count entry. Going over to the inventory side of things, these are all part of the transaction processes. So you can see here, stock count schedule, stock count entry. I'm just using these shortcuts on the home page to navigate quickly because when we did our live events in December, this was kind of a 2-hour session, so we're cutting down on some of the time. But the navigation is clearly documented in the training procedure manual, etc. So if I go ahead and type in a year-end close, actually, let me just save this off in 2016 year-end. That was a leftover. I didn't clean that up from our December events. This is my physical inventory. So you're creating a unique stock count ID. I'm saying I want to, I'm going to give it a description for reporting purposes, and now I need to tell Dynamics what I want to count. And we do that through the mass add procedure. We're going to open up that window, and typically if I'm doing a full physical of my company, I'm going to open up the site ID as my criteria, And I have a number of inventory sites within the demonstration company. So I'm just going to add in one, but you would pick the first site by just hitting the lookup and looking at the very top of the list. And then the bottom one, the to section, you're going to pick the very bottom or the last site ID. So I'm going to insert that by just clicking the insert button. We can see that here. And then lastly, I want to go ahead and click the add button. And what Dynamics is doing is reading all of the inventory items that are assigned to that particular inventory location. So that I have a listing of all of the items that I need to be counting within the warehouse for my physical. So when I'm ready to start the physical count, and this physical inventory is page 11 within the guide because this is also part of the month-end procedures and so on, I'm going to go ahead and click Start Count. What Start Count does is it takes a snapshot of the quantities on hand and then allows us to go through, and let me just start this on up. There's a number of reports, there's exception lists, there's tag reports or count reports that can be printed on out, and it's taking that snapshot at this point in time, and then once the count has been finalized, I'm going to go ahead and enter those counts through the system here. Looks like it's still processing there on that end, so let's just grab this year-end guide, one that we did, and I'm going to key the quantities in from that I've counted there, and by default, Dynamics GP will go ahead and create the calculated variance. So in this case here, if I had the system was tracking an on-hand balance of 10, but I only counted 9, the system is smart enough to know that I need to do a negative variance, or it needs to do a negative variance of -1 to bring that balance down to the true counted count, the true counted quantity on hand. Last comment about this particular window here is this checkbox, auto post stock count variances. We recommend, FMT recommends that that box be checked. And the reason for this is these variance transactions are going to be created automatically by Dynamics GP. If you don't have this box checked, what is going to happen here is, and let me just save my changes here and pop over to the inventory module real quick. Within the inventory transaction entry area, those variances are going to be created for you based upon the physical counts that you've entered. But without that auto post, all of those transactions are going to be sitting out here unposted, and so your inventory balances are really not going to be adjusted. So you want to tick the box. If you forget to tick the box, the system's going to create a batch and transactions within that batch, and you're going to want to make sure that you post that batch before you finalize the inventory year-end close. So with that, we've gone ahead and done our physical count, reconcile to GL, what this is, and I'm going to cover this once, and this is actually a feature that's throughout the system that allows us to reconcile the subledger to the ledger control accounts. And so what this allows us to do is say on the inventory side of things, these are the physical inventory assets that I have within the general ledger itself. And by clicking the process, it will go ahead and create an Excel spreadsheet automatically and show us any differences between the subledger, in this case here the inventory control module, and the ledger. And it's broken up between unmatched transactions, potentially matched transactions, and matched transactions. The reason why we're seeing this large discrepancy of unmatched transactions is that the reconciliation window, I haven't added all of the asset accounts for the inventory control module. Adding those on in would true that up. So you want to make sure that all of the asset accounts that you're using for inventory, so if you're tracking WIP, finished goods, raw materials, etc., in different asset accounts, make sure that those are all listed within the window itself. So this is a great reconciliation tool, not only for year-end, but also the month-end control, the month-end process. And as I was showing you before, this is something that is not specific to inventory. There's other modules there, and it just helps you identify a difference between the control account within the ledger and then the sub-ledger itself, and hone you in on potentially where you have some issues there. So the inventory year-end close process, as I was showing you on that slide deck, there's some check boxes to remove things. By checking these boxes, you're saying, yes, I want to remove them. So be very careful, especially around the sold lot attributes. And this is also why we do this backup, to make sure that if in case we check the box by accident, we didn't mean to do that, we can also always restore that backup and then proceed forward with going through the process again. So with that, let's kind of move on to our next section here, and it's the Receivables Management module. So this is where there's both a fiscal and a calendar year-end requirement, and you can see what the calendar year-end does and what the fiscal year-end does. This really just kind of moves these balances, within the customer summary windows from one place to another, from the current year to last year, etc. So the process for our receivables year-end closing processes, this starts, period end is page 24. The year-end processes start on page 54 of the manual. But the assumption here is that we've done some of the period end closing process. So we've reconciled the ledger, which is the screen I just showed you. We've assessed finance charges. We've issued statements, commissions, etc. But one of the things that some clients don't always do is run this process called paid sales transaction removal. And it's a horrible name because it really doesn't remove anything. It just simply moves transactions from the open area to the historical area. But by running this either at the month-end process or certainly at year-end, things like age trial balance reports and other reports that are really just looking at open transactions will run a lot faster because it has to comb through less records. Those historical last year type transactions are moved over to history. And just because you move them to history doesn't mean that you can't look at open and historical in some of the analysis reports and so on. You can go ahead and still do those things. So there's no harm in doing this. The only thing that you want to do is if you're issuing customer statements and those customer statements need to show the payments that your customers made during the particular period, you want to run this process after you've run the statements because it is going to move those payments off and those statements are going to read the open transactions there. And so you can see here that we're going to just tick all these boxes. We're going to run the process to move those things over to history. So beyond that, the receivables year-end closing process is fairly straightforward. So if you're a fiscal year company, you're going to simply check calendar year at this point in time, and you're going to run the process. And as the slide said, it's going to move these balances from one place to another. If you're a calendar year company, leave the default, which is all, because you want to do both the fiscal and the calendar year-end close all together, because they kind of does two separate things, as my slide was showing you there. So just leave the default, hit the process, and the system will go ahead and run and update those balances. Now, if you're doing sales tax, use tax, etc., there is a tax year-end closing process. And so if you're using use tax within the purchasing series, you don't want to run the tax year-end close at this point in time. Wait until the AP module or the accounts payable module is completely closed and run the tax year-end close there. But if you're simply using the tax engine of Dynamics GP for sales tax, then at the end of doing the receivables month-end close, or sorry, excuse me, the year-end close, we're going to want to go ahead and run the tax year-end close as well. And so all you have to do is tick the box to close the year and then click the process button, and once again it's moving those balances from the current year to the prior year for reporting purposes, etc. So only do this at the AR or the Receivables Management year-end close if you're not using use tax within Dynamics GP's purchasing series. If you are, do it after the purchasing year-end close there. So if for some reason you've actually recorded cash receipts in the new year before you've done the year-end close process, there's actually a reconciliation routine to reconcile the information. So the information that's in the current year prior to the year-end close will include those cash receipts that you've received in 2016. And so by running the year-end close, we're moving those balances from current year to last year, and the current years are getting zeroed. Well, in this case here, because we received cash during the current year, 2016, those balances are incorrect. And so you can go through and you can run the reconciliation process here to go ahead and true those numbers up. It'll reread all the transactions and true up the current year balances and the last year balances as well. So those things will be accurate. Maybe not super important on the receivable side of things, but definitely important on the payable side of things, which is our next step in today's session here. So payables, this is where you're going to want to apply that year-end tax update. So if you can think about the slide of how to prepare, you've downloaded the year-end tax update from Dynamics. In the handout manual, there's actually a link to the year-end tax updates for both Dynamics GP 2013 and Dynamics GP 2015, the two supported versions of Dynamics GP today. If you're running a version prior to 2013, you're not going to get year-end tax updates, and so you may have to use, in the case of payables, you may have to use a third-party solution like Green Shades or something else to print your 1099 forms out, because the year-end tax update from Microsoft will provide the form changes, and there's a few form changes that are provided in that tax update regarding the 1099 as well as the 1096, and so you're going to want to apply that before you run this process. This is also on the receivable, but just like receivables, we have a fiscal and a calendar year-end requirement, and you can see the process there of what each one of those things does. So let's go back to Dynamics GP and look at these and see what we need to do there. So the reconcile routines, we've gone through that there. The year-end closing process, just like we saw on the receivable side of things, if we're only doing the calendar year because we're fiscal, we're going to choose calendar year. If we're a calendar year company, we're going to leave it as all, and then we're going to go ahead and choose close year, the button down below, and not up in the ribbon or anything like that. And so that's going to go ahead and process everything and move the balances to the proper places. Now, 1099s, as we're going through, you might want to run the 1099 report for the vendors that qualify, so the over $600 dispersed to them during the year, and make sure that those balances are correct. And what I mean by that is that they're in the proper box. When we're putting in a payables voucher for a vendor that's 1099able, it's going to automatically default the full purchases value into the 1099 area of the voucher itself, and the box that's being selected is based upon the vendor setup. So if you have vendors that might have transactions that go into multiple boxes on the 1099 and you forget to specify at the voucher entry level what box that value should go into, you can go through this window here and you can true these numbers up. You can simply type in a number. So we can say $10,000 within this box 8, and by saving that, we're saving that record. Now, think back a couple of minutes ago when I was talking about the reconciliation routines that true up the numbers, and the way that they true those numbers up is by reading the transactions themselves. And so if you are doing any modifications to the 1099 balances within this window here, you're simply overriding what the detail of the transactions say. So if you've made edits, don't run that reconciliation routine before you print your 1099s, because the reconciliation routine is going to go back and reread all the data, and you're going to see this vendor here go back to 0, which was the balance that it was before. So if you make any edits, like I said, make sure that you print the 1099s before you run any reconciliation routine. We close this down here, and the 1099 process is fairly straightforward. We're going to go to print our 1099s. Once again, the guide is kind of walking you through that process there. This is page 61 of the guide. I forget if I called out the numbers, but month-end close is on page 36, and year-end close starts on page 57 of the guide. But this is in page 61 is where we get into 1099s, printing the edit list, editing the 1099s, etc. And from this one window here, you'll be able to go ahead and print the 1099s onto the form, the proper form, because you've applied the year-end tax update, and print 1099s as well as the 1096 piece of it. If there are anybody on today's event that still has a dot matrix printer and they're printing on pre-printed stock, that's what this alignment form is to allow you to go ahead and print on pre-printed stock through like a pin feed dot matrix printer. Most of you probably will have no idea what I'm talking about, but this just allows you to make sure that the form's in the proper orientation in the roller so that when the forms print out, they print in the appropriate boxes there. So little visit to the old school way of doing business within accounting systems, but that's still a legacy feature that's out there. So I printed my 1099s, and then I'm going to go through and run the close process. I've kind of popped this up here, but we're going to go through that process one last time. So the reconciliation piece is super important, especially if you've done check disbursements in January for your vendors that are 1099able. The balances in the 1099 section will be moved to last year's 1099 balances may not be correct. So even if you've manually edited the 1099s, at the end of this process, go through and run the reconciliation routine to make sure that those balances are correct for the current year. Because when you get to this time next year, your balances might be understated. The cash disbursement side of those balances being understated because disbursements that you've done this year actually moved into the last year bucket. So make sure that you run this reconciliation process here. So kind of quickly moving on again, we're going to go to the fixed assets section. So the month-end procedures for fixed assets, page 40 of the handout of the guide, and year-end is page 67. So super important to make sure that you close fixed assets after you've done the payables year-end, but before you do the general ledger close. Don't do it before the payables piece, do it right after, but certainly do it before you do the year-end close within the general ledger itself. And you can see what the fixed asset close is going to be doing. So how do we go through that process within Dynamics? Well, I took you through the fiscal period setup, setting up the financial periods that Dynamics GP is going to be using for the new year. Well, the fixed asset module actually has its own separate calendar setup. So before you go through and do the year-end close process in the fixed asset module, you're going to want to make sure that you build the calendar for the next year. And so a very similar approach to what I was showing you in the fiscal period setup thing. I'm just going to type in the year number. We're going to build the calendar and have it go ahead and build through that. And it's going to build the calendar for us here based upon the different financial periods during the year. And then you're going to want to come down here to the quarters side of things and just confirm that the quarters that have been defaulted in here are correct. If not, you can choose the build quarters function to make sure that those things are built, or you can manually adjust them within the window itself. But you want to make sure that these things are done prior to running the year-end processes within the fixed asset module. So what we want to do is, so Dynamics or Microsoft introduced within the fixed asset module a historical book value and depreciation report. It's somewhat of a newer feature. Prior to it being introduced, at year-end close, you needed to run the depreciation report and the book value report so that you had that, and you had to save that report, because if you ever needed to go back and see what your position was on your assets at year-end close, if you didn't have that report, you had to do a lot of work to kind of back into what that value was at the year-end basis. So these reports are out there. You know, for the most part, we don't know of any issues with them not working, but because it's a newer feature, we're still, erring on the side of caution, saying run those the depreciation report, the book value report, and archive those, and then maybe next year when we get to this kind of same training event, you don't have to worry about that because those reports are kind of tried and true. But run that through and save those things out. Save them to a file, save the hard copy, put them in a binder, whatever it might need to be done there. So the process for the year-end close and kind of where I'm at here is under tools and routines. and then our fixed assets, and then we're in year end, and we've kind of talked through some of these things already, but that screen that I just popped up, that's where that is, and once again, the navigation kind of shows that within the manual itself. And what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're selecting all of the books. So in this case here, in my demonstration company, I have both my internal, my corporate book that's pushing depreciation and amortization into the general ledger. I have a book for federal tax purposes, and I have the AMT, or the alternative minimum tax book as well. In your solution, you might only see one book, just a corporate book or whatever it might be called, that's handling the interface between the fixed asset module and the general ledger. But we're going to select all of those things. We're going to shove them over into our selected books, and then we're going to click the continue process, and that's actually going to take us through and run the year-end closing process on the fixed asset module itself. So coming back on in, like I said, this was a 2-hour event before, so I kind of feel like I'm going through at a really quick pace and almost kind of not catching my breath here. We can certainly follow up with you afterwards if you have other questions and so on. General year-end close, so general ledger year-end close. The big thing, as we all know, this closes the profit and loss accounts out to retained earnings, and it marks the year as historical. And you can see the footnote here. Within Dynamics GP, just because the year-end close has happened, you can still book back to the prior year. So in a calendar year company, we're closing the 2015 books, but we might not have our audit and our audit adjustments until sometime in March or April. You can still do the year-end close process and then book the audit adjustments back to 2015. The only thing you cannot do is you can no longer book journal entries back to 2014. It only goes back one historical year. So keep that in mind as you're considering when to close the general ledger itself, but there's no harm in closing it up. You can always book back to 2015, and one of the big things that you're going to want to do is close the books because from a financial reporting perspective in Management Reporter, and for those of you that aren't using Management Reporter that might be on 2010 or even an earlier version, that FRX, those balance sheet accounts, until the year-end close is done, it's not going to go ahead and bring those balances forward, and so your balance sheet is going to look odd because it's just going to be the net change for the period. Now there's ways to do that through calculated fields and other things, and we can help you with that, but closing the year here is going to make sure that that balance sheet is tried and true. So you want to do a couple things before you get through and start processing the general ledger year-end close. Because it closes the profit and loss accounts out to the balance sheet, you're going to want to confirm that all your profit and loss accounts are truly set as profit and loss accounts. And what I mean by that, if we go back to the financial area page and we open up our account cards, our posting accounts, this posting type right here, a balance sheet or profit and loss, that's what determines what is going to close to retain earnings and what is going to bring its balance forward into the new year. So if for some reason this cash account was mistakenly marked as a profit and loss account, when you run the year-end close, the balance of this account will move to retained earnings and its balance will be zero. And so the way that we safeguard for that, and I'm purposely going to save that, is run a smart list. So this is a great feature within the system. Most people are already using these things. And come down here to our account. So this is a listing of our accounts. And what you're going to want to do is create a search. And so in this case here, I'm going to use our main segment. It's not part of the list, so I'm going to go and choose all columns and come down, and I'm just typing the letter M to get down to main segment. So in this case here, I want to make sure that my balance sheet accounts are set to balance sheet. So in my demonstration company, my P&L starts from a main account standpoint at 4,000, and my posting type, so we already have that in that list, is equal to profit and loss. So I'm looking at any balance sheet account where it's actually set to profit and loss and choosing OK here. there's that cash account that I just flipped. So we know that we have a problem with that. We need to adjust that. The kind of the expected results of this search should be empty. There shouldn't be any records returned. If so, we've gotten our balance sheet accounts set correctly. So we're going to go back through, we're going to correct that, we're going to set it to balance sheet by using the go-to to open up the account window or just double-clicking on it to pull it up. We're going to set that to balance sheet, save that off, and then we can refresh to make sure that we don't have anything in that list. And then we're going to do the exact opposite. So it's, in this case here, greater than 3,999. So, it's over, it's 4,000 or over, and the posting type is set to balance sheet. And we're going to run that same search there, and we're going to have some results here because I purposely kind of set those things up. So we're going to want to true all those things up, make sure that they're all correct so that when we run the close, everything is moving properly. If you do it and you mistakenly do it and you're on a version that includes the ability to reverse a year-end close process, you'll be able to fix that and rerun the year-end close process. If you mistakenly do it and you don't have that feature available to you, we can help you. There's routines that can be run, etc. One other thing to figure out if you want to do this or not is, our unit accounts, statistical accounts within the system, do you want to go ahead and clear those balances out during the year-end close? So treat these statistical balances as if they were a profit and loss account. So things like headcount, if we're using those for allocations and other things, we might not want to have this box ticked because we want to bring the headcount forward into the new year. But if you're using other statistics to measure other non-financial type transactions or statistics in the system, and we want to close those out for the year, we want to make sure that that box is ticked at the unit account level. So now we're ready to go through the year-end closing process, and we're going to go through and choose the year-end close for the general ledger. So year-end closing here. Here's our retained earnings account. Where's that retained earnings account coming from? It's actually coming from the general ledger setup window. It's coming from right here within the GL setup. So if for some reason this default account is incorrect because you've changed retained earnings account during the year or something, you can always go back and update that right here. Within the close itself, you also have the ability to do some things. Remove unused segment numbers. This is coming from the segment definition area underneath the setup of the financial series. So we might want to remove those, but this maintain inactive accounts. If you've marked an account inactive and you might want to reactivate it in the coming year, you want to make sure that you check this box and then choose all inactive accounts or only with budgetary amounts. But this is where the first one is, yes, I want to remove it, and then the logic of the next question is, yes, I want to keep it. And so you want to make sure that you're reading the prompts carefully and choosing wisely as you're going through the process. So we're going to close the year. One of the features I think that was added in GP 2013 was the progress bar. So if you've been working with GP for a long time, you used to go and click the year-end close process, and the system would just kind of sit there and not give you any kind of indication that it was doing anything at all. And it would cause a lot of angst and stress of, I don't know if it's working, it's not, because the mouse is still this little arrow, it's not an hourglass, there's no indication that things are going, and then suddenly a report will pop up onto the screen and say that the close has happened. So Microsoft has added a progress bar so that you get a visual cue of how it's going along through the process and where you're at within that process there. And then you can see down below this reverse historical year, a newer feature added. If you don't have that on your screen, we can talk about upgrading, or if you do need that feature because you need to go back to 2014 in this example here, give our customer care folks a call or send them an email, customercare@fmtconsultants.com, and they'll be able to provide you with the scripts and everything that needed in order to roll back that year. All right, we're in the home stretch here. We got 12 minutes left in today's event here. So we'll talk about payroll really quick. I know that there's a few people on that are using the Dynamics GP payroll module. Month-end procedures, page 48. Payroll, a year-end close on page 80. So this is where you want to make sure that if you haven't already installed the year-end update at the AP or the Payables Management year-end close, that you install the year-end update after all of the payroll runs for 2015 are complete, your month-end, your quarter-end, your period-end procedures have been done. We're applying the year-end update there so that we have the updates that we need for W-2s, other things around like the Affordable Care Act reporting and so on. So the big piece of year-end close is there's somebody that asked a question about analytical accounting. I will come back to you, I promise. There's really nothing different on the analytical accounting side of things. It'll be covered as part of the general year-end close, but if there's some more specific information that you need about that, I can certainly answer some more detailed questions after this. So payroll year-end closing, I've run all of my payrolls, I've applied the year-end tax update, etc. There is, I want to go ahead and create the wage file, and what this is doing is it's reading the payroll information and copying that over into a separate area of Dynamics GP so that we can continue processing payroll in the new year, maybe even prior to us producing the W-2s for the 2015 calendar year. So we're gonna run the process to create this wage file, and then from there we're gonna review our W-2 information for our employees, and we can adjust these the values if needed. So if for some reason something was incorrect, we can adjust it just like we were doing those 1099 balances there. This process here, we can run a validation report that actually shows us the W-2 and 1099-R positions of each of our people within our organization, and then use this edit function here to go ahead and adjust those balances. The balances that we're adjusting here are only within the wage file itself. So if there are pretty significant edits that you're having to make, you may want to go back through prior to doing the payroll year-end close and adjust those balances within the payroll module itself, because this is just simply changing the numbers that will print on the W-2. So if you're starting to see significant adjustments being made, stop the process, go back to the payroll module, process the adjustments within the payroll module so it's correct from an employee inquiry window and everything else, and then recreate the wage file. You can always come back in and regenerate that wage file again, and then you can true up the final little bits that you need to do there. Printing our W-2 forms, I got this FICA issue with my system that I still haven't fixed from December, so pardon the little message that popped on up. We're going to go ahead and run we're going to print the W-2s. We're going to print so our W-2 forms, the W-3 transmittal, our 1095-Cs, our 1094s, etc. We're going to go through and do all those things. And once we've printed our W-2s, there's a couple more updates that need to be made to the system. And maybe right before I get to that, excuse me, let's talk about electronic filing. Federal Magnetic Media is the module that you'll need to have registered if you're on business ready licensing or the perpetual licensing model that Dynamics GP has out today. You're entitled to use that module. It's included in the starter pack, or the base piece of functionality that Microsoft provides. But unless it's enabled, unless that box is checked in enabling that, you won't be able to get to this electronic filing. So if you don't see it and you have electronic filing requirements, contact our customer care group and we can show you where you need to go and tick that box in order to enable it. And then simply selecting the year, and it'll generate the federal EFW2 file. The only thing that it does not do is it doesn't do the 1099-Rs, and it doesn't do any SUTA or state forms. So if you have a need to do electronic filing at the state level or so on, then talk to us about Green Shades, because that's a tried and true product out there that does the proper filing there. So last thing from a payroll perspective is making sure that we're ready to start processing payroll in 2016. There's 2 rounds of tax updates that come on out, and so the way that you apply those tax updates is going to the Dynamics GP flag, going to maintenance, and then you'll see U.S. payroll updates, and then check for tax updates. And from here, we're going to go ahead and choose automatic because it's going to call out to Microsoft and pull down the appropriate format. By choosing next, you're going to need your authorization number. Typically, the phone number that you're doing that you used when you registered Dynamics. If for some reason you don't know your authorized number, contact us and we can get it for you if we're your Microsoft Dynamics GP partner. If we're not your partner, we'd love to be one. Be that partner. We can walk you through that process, but reach out to whoever you're working with on the Dynamics GP side of things and get that number, because what this is going to do is log you into the Microsoft Dynamics customer source portal and pull that file down and apply the appropriate updates. There's actually typically 2 waves of updates. The first round was out in the latter part of December. The second part, I forgot to look this morning, but it's always around mid-January. It might already be out by going to the hyperlink that I included in the year-end training guide, where the year-end updates and so on are at. That landing page that you hop on with Microsoft Dynamics or on the Microsoft customer source site will tell you if that tax update is available. But make sure that you check during the month of January to make sure that there's no final adjustments. If you think back, a long while ago now, when the U.S. government was trying to decide if they were going to extend what everybody was calling the Bush-era tax cuts, there was a lot of tax updates that were rolling out from Microsoft, as our legislators were determining where they were going to go with that. So can't hurt to apply this thing and maybe even hit it one more time in February just to make sure they have the latest thing there. There was one other question here. Do you recommend running check links before year-end close? We do. I mean, check links is actually part of Microsoft's best practices for month-end as well as year-end. The big thing about check links is if you've never run it before, one, you got to make sure that you got a good recoverable backup, because check links, besides just moving data from one place to another, it can remove data. So inside the Dynamics GP data structure, there's these things that are called logical tables, and basically they're a collection of 3 or more areas where data is stored within Dynamics GP. Checklinks looks at those logical tables and says, well, I found it in 2 places, but I didn't find it in the 3rd, so I'll insert it into the 3rd place. And so it might be writing records on in, or it found it in 1, but it didn't find it in the other 2, so it makes the default decision of, that's a bad record, we'll go ahead and remove that. So make sure that you have a recoverable backup. Make sure that you have everybody out of Dynamics GP as these things are running. And you're going to need to do that, off hours probably, because you can't kick everybody out of the system during the day. And if you haven't run check links before, strongly recommend running it in a test database or a test system to see what it's going to do to your production data before you run it. So great question. Be very careful with the process, but if you look at best practices that are on the Microsoft customer source site, it'll actually go ahead and show you what you need there. So we got a couple minutes left. We've had some questions going along. I got a couple poll questions for you. We're actually giving away 2 copies of Microsoft Office 365. So we'll select a winner from each of these polls here. So let me launch our first poll here, and so our question is, what is the first thing that you should do before you start up the year-end close process? And so you guys can kind of click what you think the appropriate answer is there. There's certainly one that's tongue-in-cheek, just to see if everybody's still awake there. We'll give it a couple more seconds, and then I'll go ahead and close the poll on up, and we'll show the answers there. So we got about 73% of the attendees have voted here. We got a couple more coming on in. Let me see if we can find the status of this. It looks like things have slowed down. So let me go and close the poll here, and then let me share the results on out. And so what you should be seeing is the results. What's the first thing you should do? Well, I mean, you could get a cup of coffee. We've gotten through the year-end closing process in about an hour here. Reading the manual couldn't hurt, but the answer we're definitely looking for was the third one. Make sure that you backed up the system database and all companies. I can't stress that enough. I've said it multiple times during today's event here. So get yourself prepared, back everything up so you have a point of recovery there. So we'll go ahead and pull a winner from that that listing there. Let me go ahead and hide these results, and let's go to our second one. So the question is going to be around accounts payable. Most of us are having to pay somebody. So if you've processed accounts payable checks in 2016, what are you supposed to do after you've run the year-end closing process? I can tell you for a fact the third answer is incorrect because there is a point of recovery there. So you have not messed up your system. That's kind of just keep and make sure that everybody's awake there. And so we're ticking on up. We're about 50% of the attendees have kind of weighed in. We're getting back up to the high 70s here. And we're right spot on the hour. So let me go ahead and see here. I think we've gotten everybody in. Let's close that, and then we'll share the results. And 13% answered manually up to date the 1099 vendor information. You certainly can do that, but the second answer, the run the payables reconciliation routine, that's the correct answer. The first one's not incorrect, but you're doing work that the system will do for you. So running that payables reconciliation routine, looking at the month-end and year-end procedure guide for the payable series, and making sure that you run that reconciliation routine to true those things up. Once again, kind of page 36, page 57 of the guide. With that, I certainly appreciate everybody taking about an hour to go through the event today. I hope it's been informational, entertaining, etc. We'll go ahead and pull some winners from the two poll questions there, and send over the Office 365 subscription for you to enjoy over the course of the year once you've activated it there. Last comment here, the handout is still in the handout section of the event. Once I close the event down, that handout's not going to be there. So let me really quick pop open the chat, and I'm just going to send out the shortcut URL. Here's the closing guide. If I could type. And so I just sent that out to the chat side of things. So copy that hyperlink, click on that hyperlink. It's just going to pull open a browser and immediately start downloading the PDF. With that, if you have any questions, if you need any assistance during your year-end close process, feel free to reach out to us, www.fmtconsultants.com. YouTube, we have an FMT channel that will have this event as well as other training events on out there. I sure thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, and enjoy your year-end close. Thank you.